Some people regard this problem as very vexing, some will regard it as a non-problem at all. If you reject mainstream physical science, then this will not be a problem for you. However, if you do reject mainstream physical science, you will have other problems, like explaining how on earth computers work or anything in the physical universe works. The other part of this conundrum are psychedelic experiences, and in particular the question of whether they're veridical, whether the contents of psychedelic experiences tell us something about reality, or whether they're simply random firings of neurons, in other words, artifacts of the way the brain works. So mainstream physical science provides an in-depth explanation of external phenomena. Psychedelic experience indicates another realm. That other realm doesn't fit very well with our understanding of the world from physical science. For example, the feeling of being one with everyone else, of being one with the universe, does not sit very well with the understanding of ourselves as being a lump of tissue inside the cranium, which is distinct from, separate from, not physically connected to other brains. Either those psychedelic experiences are nonsense and mumbo-jumbo, or they are telling us something about reality, and if so, how do we reconcile that view of reality with what physical science tells us? The kind of things I'm thinking about in psychedelic experience are encountering other beings who have an intelligent discourse with you, the congruity of experiences from different cultures, in particular Benny Shannon's work on ayahuasca, which shows that similar experiences occur in ayahuasca users from different cultures. Is it possible to get a naturalistic reconciliation between the scientific models of the world and the veridicality, the truthfulness of psychedelic experiences? One approach to this is to look at Eastern mystical philosophy, in this case the Vedanta, which has as one of its Mahavakyas or mottos that we are all one. Thou art Brahman. We are all identical, numerically identical with God. But there's a corresponding philosophy to be found in the West, in the work of a certain Irish archbishop, who had a corresponding motto that we live, move and have our being in God. I'll expand upon this in a moment. And he was a contemporary of this guy, who had a radically different view from this mystical philosophy, and one which has dominated Western thinking, Western intellectual understanding of the world. He would say that we live, move and have our being in time and space, not in God or in consciousness. This guy won the battle in the 18th century to determine how we would understand our reality. But Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley, has not gone away. He is lurking in the shadows of Western thought, as usually he is represented in academia as good target practice. Bertrand Russell, for example, said his arguments are irrefutable, but he's wrong. We know there's a physical world. Here it is. And yet Berkeley's arguments show otherwise. I don't know of any other academic discipline where people can say the arguments are irrefutable, but they're wrong. But somehow this happens in philosophy. Berkeley's fundamental dictum was esse est percipi or percipere. Either existence is either to be perceived or to act, to do the act of perceiving. And what we mean by perceive is anything that is experiential, of tasting, smelling, seeing colours, having feelings. And that's the English translation. This is something I'm going to read out, not going to read out very much, but this is because it summarises not only Berkeley's philosophy, but the fact that he regarded it as self-evident. He did not regard his philosophy as being some weird mystical thing that's come out of the scriptures. It's something which is present to us in every day. Some truths that are so near and obvious to the mind that a man or a woman need only open his eyes to see them. Such I take this important one to be, to wit, that all the choir of heaven and the furniture of earth, in a word, all those bodies which compose the mighty frame of the world have not any subsistence without a mind, that their being is to be perceived. If something is not perceived, it doesn't exist. Jonathan Swift was a contemporary of Berkeley who had a somewhat different view. He invited Berkeley for dinner, and when Berkeley got there, he slammed the door shut in his face and said, well, if your immaterialist philosophy is true, you can walk through the door. This represents a common misunderstanding of Berkeley's philosophy. It is not that certain things are intangible. It's not that doors and walls are intangible, but we're not. Everything. It's like being in the Matrix, which obviously is an anachronistic metaphor for Berkeley. A world in which all that we experience forms a consistent, dreamlike model in which our bodies can impact against other things in the sense that we feel a resistance if we try to push through a solid object, or we hear a sound, or we have a taste or a smell. We have all these experiences which are real, but the physical substance is purely notional. Going back to Hindu philosophy, Adi Shankara had a corresponding but more profound philosophy, which is rooted in the Vedas and the Upanishads, but was not governed by those scriptures. The philosophy of Shankara does not stem purely from written revelation, but rather from insights into reality, in the same way that Berkeley arrived at his understanding of the world by looking at it. Likewise Shankara did. Shankara says the study of the scriptures is fruitless as long as Brahman has not been experienced. And when Brahman has been experienced, it is useless to read the scriptures. Shankara's famous example is that of a snake. You imagine you're in a dark room and in a corner you see a snake and you get very frightened and you're fearful, and then the light shines differently on the snake and you see it's just a rope curled up. In like manner, just as the snake's body vanishes as soon as you know it's not a snake but a rope, in like manner, this seemingly solid world vanishes when we know it's purely a construct of our consciousness. When we realize that this desk is merely a construct built up from our perceptions of it, desk isn't there anymore. In Shankara's view, Brahman creates Maya, the manifest world, the world we seem to inhabit, by lila or play. What does that mean? I think it means it's like mime. God is miming this world. We are each God pretending to be in a three-dimensional space, in a Newtonian space. It's like a friend of mine who was a mime artist. He was doing a show in a prison and all the audience were sitting there really tough and saying, oh, I don't want to be insane by this guy. He took off his bowler hat and said, I'm feeling not very well today. My stomach's churning. I don't think I can get to the bathroom. And he vomited, mimed vomiting into his hat, swirled it around. God, horrible smell. And then with an evil glint in his eye, threw it at somebody in the audience who backed off for a moment. And then, no, it's not real. But in that instant, for that split second, it was as if that vomit in the bowler hat was real. In like manner, we behave, we think as if this is real. And it'll vanish, as the vomit did, when we realize it's not real. So that is how I imagine Brahman creates this world. Through us, we are Brahman, and we pretend as if this is a real world. When a man lives in the domain of mental ignorance, the phenomenal universe exists for him. This doesn't mean the phenomenal world exists. It means it seems to exist. It appears to exist. There is a problem in expressing this non-dual philosophy in plain words, because it sounds contradictory. How to say the table is here because my pen is on it, but it's not real. It's a bit like in the Matrix film. We know there is no spoon because it's in the Matrix. It's a construct. But it seems like there is. We perceive, we have a perception. And it's like a dream, which is the nearest metaphor available in the 8th century India. In a dream, the mind is emptied of the objective universe, but it creates by its own power a complete universe of subject and object. The waking state is only a prolonged dream. The phenomenal universe exists in the mind. In other words, just as Brahman creates this world around us, Greenwich and all the rest of it, well, likewise when we dream or ingest psychedelic substances, we create or co-create with other beings another phenomenal world. Another implication of this view that there's nothing but consciousness is that we are not separated. We are all components of one single consciousness. Because how could there be anything separating conscious minds if there is nothing but consciousness in existence? There's no space between us, no real space. The Atman's appearance as an individual soul is caused by the delusion of our understanding and has no reality. Each of us is identical with Brahman. We are each God, but creating an illusory sheath of being a separate being. Likewise, the desk is God, the flowers are God. Everything in this theory is Brahman. Everything is the cosmic consciousness. There's nothing else in existence. But just as I imagine myself to be a separate being, the desk thinks of itself as a separate being. The flowers think of themselves as a separate being. And we can imagine within this framework that ingesting psychedelic substances, we can overcome that illusion and realize that we are actually the same thing, the same being as the desk and the flowers. The self is the illusion created by pretending that you have a self, which you don't, really. There are correspondences within Western philosophy, for example, David Hume, who said the self is a bundle of sensations. It's as if there's an ocean of consciousness, and there's a little packet. That's me. That packet of consciousness is what I am. But you're no different from all the other field of consciousness. It's just that you're pretending to be separate. And Berkeley, in his later years, moved towards this philosophy, not only regarding the material world as an illusion, but also the separation of selves. This is from his last book, Cyrus. The principles of motion and vegetation in living bodies seem to be debilitations from the invisible fire or spirit of the universe. So although in his early philosophy, Berkeley seemed somewhat different from the Vedanta, from Shankaracharya, towards the end he realized the same philosophy, that not only is the physical world illusory, but our separation as an individual self is illusory. We are God. Why should you believe any of this? I began by saying that we have a problem of reconciling physical science with psychedelic experience. And I've tossed all this philosophy, say, oh, well, if the world is illusory, if it's all just consciousness, then the problem disappears and psychedelic experiences could be veridical because they're just representing part of the whole field of consciousness. Well, why would you believe that? This is Shankara's statement. The pure truth of the Atman, which is buried under Maya and the effects of Maya, can be reached by meditation, contemplation, and other spiritual disciplines, such as a knower of Brahman may be described, but never by subtle arguments. And yet he gives subtle arguments. For example, this. If this universe were real, we should continue to perceive it in deep sleep. But we perceive nothing then. Therefore, it's unreal, unlike our dreams. Which is a subtle argument, which is a non sequitur. Shankara's philosophy is correct, but that argument is bogus. Berkeley said, to be is to be perceived or to perceive. And he is sometimes read as having this kind of argument. For perceived things, existence is constituted by being perceived. So, perceived things are mere constructs, not part of fundamental reality. So only pure consciousness is left over as fundamental reality. How can we formulate an argument to ground this in reason? So Shankara's philosophy does go more deeply than Berkeley's early philosophy or Hume, because it says we're all just part of Brahman, or we are actually identical with Brahman. Pursues what's called sublation into the conscious mind. So sublation means you recognize that a certain construct is a construct and it's not really there, like the snake isn't really a snake, but a rope. And thereby he dissolves the self into Maya, into the illusion, and the self is a construct projected onto Brahman. So Brahman is the reality. You project your imagined self, your imagined identity, onto Brahman. Berkeley's philosophy is embedded in modern Western culture. Sorry about the typo. It's more accessible to Western readers and based more on argument than revelation. A little bit of context. The philosophical problem that Berkeley was addressing was formulated a few centuries earlier by René Descartes, the mind-body problem. How do you within science, within rational thinking, reconcile the conscious mind with the physical brain. That problem was not well regarded in philosophy for a long time because consciousness is not what they call a third person observable. I can't see your conscious minds. I can't open up your head and have a look. Oh, there's your sensation of taste. There's your fear. There's your hope. No. What we can do is to measure electrical signals. And for a long time, science regarded only those physical measurables as being worthy of investigation. In the 1990s, that changed, particularly with David Chalmers, who said that even when you fully understand how the brain works, even if you understand every synapse, how it thinks, how it remembers things, there's still a big problem left over, which is how on earth does that lump of brain tissue give you consciousness? And that's what he called the hard problem. If I were to take a fig and smash it, you wouldn't feel anything. If I were to do that to your head, you would feel something. And yet, we don't find that surprising. But the brain, the body, is just a lump of physical matter. It's tissue. And somehow it has consciousness. And yet other things, that's a wooden table. A wooden table is made of the same organic matter as my head, but you'd think it absurd if you said it felt something when you chopped it. Are you just a meat machine? Can thoughts arise from a solid lump of matter? It's absurd to think this table can think, but not absurd to think your brain can think. Something odd happening there. One philosophical theory to address this is called emergentism. If you make a lump of matter very complicated, it will suddenly become conscious. Really? Consider a red perception. Nothing complicated there, it's very simple. And yet, you're conscious of it. You have a conscious sensation of redness, which is very simple. So it appears that consciousness is not about complexity. This is a map of a famous underground railway system. It's very complicated. Good Lord. But you cannot make it coloured by making it more complex. In order to make it coloured, you have to add coloured ink in. Obviously, making something more complex does not give you qualia, does not give you sensations. You have to add colour in. Likewise, a consciousness has to be an essential ingredient in reality. It cannot emerge from physical matter. A mere lump of matter cannot suddenly magically pop up with consciousness. It has to be an added ingredient. Very quickly. Bare intuition is not enough, so it must be bolstered with experiments. I have two experiments, but I'll only be able to do one of them. Black and white Mary. This is an experiment initially published by Frank Jackson. That's the reference if you want to look it up. Here is a modified version, a better version. So Mary is someone who lives in a colourful world like we do. But she is born without the capacity for having any colour perception. Something wrong with her brain. She can't see any colours at all. But she goes into neurology, becomes an expert, excels at understanding the visual cortex. So when you see anything coloured, Mary knows exactly what is going on inside your brain. She has a comprehensive, complete knowledge of the neural mechanics of seeing colours. So Mary acquires all physical facts about the human visual cortex. This is a hypothetical experiment, it's not real. And Mary becomes a physical monist, meaning she believes there's nothing in reality except physical stuff. One day, Mary gets a call from the surgery department offering her some brain surgery to fix her lack of colour vision. She agrees to this, of course. That, yeah, great idea. And she sits and wonders what colours really look like. She's never seen it. Wow. And she goes to the operating theatre, but she's ambushed by a philosopher who reads out a definition of science by Karl Popper. And this definition says that the scientific method is based upon forming a hypothesis. You carry out an experiment, and the hypothesis predicts what you will observe when you do that experiment. So the philosopher says, you have all the physical facts about the visual cortex and a complete theory of it. You're about to conduct a physical experiment on it. So therefore, you should be able to observe, you should be able to predict what you will observe in this experiment. That is the basic notion of Popperian science. You have a theory, you say, if I do this experiment, that theory will predict what you'll observe. Mary is going to do an experiment on her visual cortex. What will she observe when she wakes up from the operation? Of course, she says, I don't know. She has no answer. I don't know what colours look like. I do not know what I will observe. What will I observe when I see colours for the first time? How can I predict that? So Mary can predict all physical facts about her post-surgery visual cortex, but cannot predict what she will observe in her mind. Therefore, it follows from logic that conscious experience of colour is not a physical fact. Therefore, consciousness is not part of the physical world. And in my remaining minus 10 seconds, I will skip to the core argument that Bishop Berkeley put forward. Actually, I'll list Berkeley's semantic argument. Back to the 18th century. All mental terms are defined by private ostensive definition. What does that mean? If you take this red, you do not know what that word red means unless you've seen red. If you're born colourblind, the word red doesn't mean anything, other than obviously the wavelength of light. In contrast, colour, smells, taste, they're all defined. So you have to have a certain taste in order to know what the taste means. If I say, it's a wonderful chocolate flavour, you will not know what I'm referring to unless you've actually had that experience. Physical terms are very different. They're defined analytically in terms of undefined primitives. For example, an atom is made up of protons. A proton has a certain electrical charge, meaning it repels electrons. Electrons have mass. They have a certain extrinsic relation between them. Everything in physics is constructed by definitions of big things in terms of little things, down to the bottom, mass, charge, don't know what they are. Physics does not need to know what mass is, it's just a quantity. So we have two completely different discourses. Mental terms are all defined by having experience and labeling it. You see red, say, oh, that's called red. Physical terms are all defined analytically in terms of fundamentals. There's no overlap. Any term about physics is not a term denoting anything in consciousness. Therefore, any pile of propositions in physics can never deduce a proposition in mental world. Therefore, mental facts are distinct from physical facts. There's never any crossover between them. Therefore, the mental world is ontologically subsisting apart from the physical world, which is Berkeley's semantic argument, which proves it's all in your mind. And given it's all in your mind, there's no problem in reconciling the veridicality of psychedelic experience with science. It's all consciousness, so you can have things which are not physical. You can have elves, you can have commonality of human consciousness. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fit in with physical science, because physical science sits within consciousness. Thank you.